Have you ever wondered if that nagging unease you feel sometimes might have a deeper, perhaps even spiritual origin? There's a quiet restlessness that often stirs within us, a feeling we can't quite name. That sense of emptiness that descends mid-afternoon. The disquiet that arises when we're alone with our thoughts. The impression that something is missing, even when everything seems to be in place. These aren't merely fleeting moods, they are whispers of the soul crying out for attention. In our fast-paced world, saturated with notifications, commitments, and constant distractions, we rarely pause to listen to these inner voices. We keep moving, filling every minute with activity, every space with noise, every silence with more information. And so, day after day, we slowly drift away from what truly matters, our deep connection with the divine that dwells within us. Pope Francis has alerted us to this reality with words that touch the heart. The noise of the world makes us forget to listen to the rhythm of our own soul. And when we cease to listen to it, we begin to fall spiritually ill. This spiritual illness doesn't always come with obvious symptoms. On the contrary, it manifests subtly in our daily lives, in small signs we often ignore or misinterpret. Have you noticed how difficult it's become to focus on prayer? How your sleep feels restless, even when your body is tired? Have you observed that irritability that arises without apparent cause, the anxiety that clenches your chest, or the constant feeling that you're merely surviving instead of truly living? These are physical and emotional manifestations of an imbalance that begins in the spirit. Even our surroundings can reflect this inner condition. The persistent clutter in your home, despite attempts at organization. Objects breaking with unusual frequency. That plant that, despite your best efforts, continues to wilt. These small discomforts and disharmonies may be trying to communicate something deeper about our spiritual state. Pope Francis invites us to look beyond the surface. Let us pay attention to the signs that God sends us daily. Sometimes they come as small disturbances in our routine, inviting us to pause and look within. His words, always filled with pastoral wisdom, remind us that God speaks to us in many ways, and often through what we consider ordinary and insignificant. Allow me, with humility and respect, to invite you to a brief pause at this moment. Breathe deeply. Close your eyes for a few moments and ask yourself, what has been troubling my heart lately? What thoughts arise when I finally silence the external noise? What emotions have I been avoiding confronting? You don't need all the answers now. The simple act of asking these questions is already a significant step. It's a movement of the soul toward the clarity we so deeply seek, and it is precisely about this clarity that I wish to speak with you today. For I firmly believe that this message has reached you for a divine purpose, to reveal some important causes of this spiritual unease and to offer a path of renewal. When we understand the true origin of our spiritual malaise, we are already halfway to healing, and that is what I will share with you. Not just symptoms, but causes. Not just diagnoses, but paths of transformation. Let me share something I've observed over the years. Many people reach a point in their lives where they experience a kind of gradual spiritual decline. It's not something that happens overnight, like a sudden collapse. It's more like the slow erosion of a hillside, where small daily landslides eventually create a dramatic change in the inner landscape. I know Maria, a dedicated teacher who always had a vibrant faith. She used to find time for prayer every morning, attended Mass regularly, and felt a deep connection with God. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, that connection began to weaken. First, the morning prayers became shorter and more distracted. Then Sunday Mass began to feel like an obligation instead of an encounter with the divine. The Bible, once read daily, spent weeks closed in a drawer. Maria didn't abandon her faith consciously or deliberately. She simply allowed the small daily distractions to occupy the space that once belonged to the sacred. The cell phone replaced the missal. Social media took the place of contemplation. The news of the world, often laden with negativity, overshadowed the good news. And so, almost without realizing it, Maria found herself spiritually exhausted, with a sense of emptiness that no distraction could fill. Her story is not unique. Many of us can identify with this experience of gradual distancing, this cooling. of spiritual life that happens not through great crises of faith, but through small daily neglects. As Pope Francis warns us, the greatest danger to spiritual life is not great sins, but the daily indifference that distances us from God almost without our noticing. What then are the sources of this imbalance? What causes this silent erosion in our inner life? Allow me to share some reflections, always with the sincere desire to enlighten, never to judge. One of the first causes is what we might call constant distraction. We live in an age where silence has become almost unbearable. We fill every moment with stimuli, music in our ears as we walk, videos while we wait in line, messages being checked every few minutes. This external cacophony makes it almost impossible to hear the gentle voice of God, who often speaks to us in silence. Pope Francis observes, "We are afraid of silence because we fear encountering ourselves with our weaknesses and questions. But it is precisely in this silence that God waits to speak to our hearts. When we avoid silence, we also avoid the encounter with our own soul and, consequently, with God who dwells within it." Another source of spiritual imbalance is what we can identify as practical materialism. This is not just the pursuit of material goods, but a worldview that values only the tangible, the measurable, the immediate. In this perspective, prayer seems unproductive, contemplation, a waste of time, spiritual life, something secondary that can be postponed for when there's time. There is also what the Holy Father calls globalized indifference. This tendency to become insensitive to the suffering of others, to become accustomed to the injustices we see daily, to allow our hearts to harden in the face of the world's pain. This indifference affects not only our relationship with others, but also with God. For as St. John teaches us, anyone who does not love a brother whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. 1 John 4:20 NIV. Chronic anxiety is another significant source of our spiritual malaise. Jesus taught us, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes?" Matthew 6:25 NIV. Yet, we live constantly, projected into the future, worried about scenarios that may never materialize, wasting the present, the only moment in which we can truly encounter God. Finally, there is what could be called disguised spiritual pride. This subtle tendency to think that our spiritual journey depends entirely on our own efforts, forgetting that God's grace is always the first and most important element in our life of faith. As Pope Francis reminds us, holiness is not the result of our heroism, but of humble openness to God's action in our lives. Recognizing these sources of imbalance should not lead us to discouragement, but to hope. For identifying the cause of an illness is the first step toward finding its cure. And that is precisely what I wish to share now, paths of transformation and spiritual renewal. Let me tell you about Carlos, a middle-aged executive who lived completely absorbed in his work. His 12-hour workdays, combined with commuting time and family responsibilities, left no room for spiritual life. He attended church occasionally, more out of tradition than conviction. His prayer was hurried, mechanical, when it existed at all. God had become a distant concept, not a living presence. Everything changed when Carlos faced a health crisis that forced him to drastically reduce his work pace. Initially, those moments of forced pause were agonizing. He felt useless, restless, unable to cope with the silence and inactivity. But gradually something began to change. One afternoon, while recovering at home, Carlos found a book on spirituality that his wife had left on the nightstand. He began to read it without great expectations, just to pass the time. But those words began to awaken something dormant within him. He found himself reflecting on his life, his priorities, his relationship with God. Inspired by the reading, Carlos decided to set aside 15 minutes daily for silence and prayer, a modest but significant commitment for someone who lived in constant motion. At first, these moments were challenging. His mind wandered, his body fidgeted, time seemed to drag. But he persevered. After a few weeks, Carlos began to notice subtle changes. The silence no longer bothered him so much. His prayer times became deeper, less mechanical. He began to perceive God's presence in small details of everyday life, in a child's smile, in the beauty of a sunrise, in the kindness of a stranger. His anxiety lessened. His relationship with his family improved. Even his work, when he gradually returned to it, took on new meaning. What happened to Carlos was not a spectacular miracle, but a gradual transformation that began with a simple decision to make room for God amidst the turmoil of life. As Pope Francis says, true conversion does not happen in great dramatic events, but in the small yeses we say to God every day. You too can begin this journey of spiritual renewal today with a simple and concrete gesture. I propose something within everyone's reach. Set aside 5 minutes of absolute silence today. Just 5 minutes. No cell phone, no television, no distractions. 5 minutes to simply be in God's presence, without the need for elaborate words or complex formulas. Just you and God, in an intimate and transformative encounter. It may seem little, but it's a beginning. It's like opening a small window in a dark room. Gradually, the light begins to enter and illuminate the entire space. These 5 minutes a day can gradually expand to 10, 15, 30. Not out of obligation, but out of desire. For as we experience the peace of this encounter with God, we naturally desire more. Pope Francis teaches us that prayer is not an escape from the world, but a deeper way of being in it. When we pray, we don't disconnect from reality, but we see it with new eyes, the eyes of faith. And this new vision transforms not only our perception, but our actions, our choices, our way of life. Imagine your heart as a garden. For a long time, perhaps this garden has been neglected. Weeds have grown, flowers have withered, the fountain has dried up. But no garden is beyond recovery. With patient and constant care, even the most barren land can bloom again. The spiritual renewal I desire for you begins just like this, with small daily cares for your inner garden. A moment of silence here, a sincere prayer there, an act of kindness over there. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, life returns. The flowers of peace, joy, and hope begin to bloom. The fountain of divine grace flows again, and you find yourself inhabiting an inner space of beauty and harmony, even amidst external storms. This is the turning point in your spiritual journey. Right now, as you read these words, something is happening within you. A seed is being planted, a light is being kindled, an invitation is being made. It is God himself who bends toward you and whispers, "Come, I am here. I have always been. I will always be." You are not reading these words by chance. In a universe of infinite possibilities, this message has reached you at this specific moment in your life. Perhaps this is the sign you asked God for at some point in prayer. Perhaps it is the answer to an unease you have been carrying. Perhaps it is simply a gentle reminder that you are not alone on your journey. Pope Francis frequently reminds us that God never tires of seeking us even when we turn away. This is the extraordinary beauty of our faith. No matter how far we have walked in the opposite direction, a single step toward God is enough to discover that He has already traveled the entire way to us. From now on, I invite you to look at the small moments of your day with new eyes. That moment of peace while watching the sunset, that inexplicable feeling of comfort when listening to music, that tug at your heart when you see an act of human kindness. These are all signs of the divine presence, whispers of a God who constantly seeks ways to reach us. There is an ancient spiritual practice known as the examination of conscience that can be extremely valuable in this process of renewal. It's not just about identifying flaws and sins, as many think, but about recognizing God's movements in our daily lives. Pope Francis suggests a simplified version of this practice. At the end of each day, ask yourself, where did I feel God's presence today? Where did I resist that presence? Where was I an instrument of divine love for others? These simple questions, asked with sincerity and openness, can profoundly transform our perception of daily life. We begin to notice patterns, to identify moments of grace, to recognize areas that need healing and attention. It's like turning on a flashlight in a dark room. Suddenly, we see what has always been there, but remained hidden. By practicing this attentive gaze, We also begin to notice how certain daily choices bring us closer to or further from God. Those minutes spent on gossip or empty criticism, the excessive time dedicated to unedifying content, the tendency to postpone prayer to a more convenient moment that never arrives. This is not about developing a condemning gaze upon oneself, but a loving and honest gaze, like that of a gardener who examines his garden to know where he needs to dedicate more attention. Pope Francis warns us about a subtle danger on this journey. Many times we seek grand transformations and ignore the small daily steps that truly change our lives. He reminds us that holiness does not consist of extraordinary actions, but in faithfulness to small things done with great love. It is not necessary to undertake lengthy spiritual retreats or extreme ascetic practices to renew your spiritual life. Just start where you are, with what you have. Perhaps for you at this moment, that small step is to resume daily reading of a passage from the Bible. Or perhaps it is to participate in Mass more frequently and attentively. It could be dedicating a few minutes in the morning to consecrate your day to God, or perhaps giving thanks before each meal. Perhaps it is simply pausing amidst work to lift your heart to God in a brief prayer. The important thing is not the magnitude of the action, but the intention and the constancy with which we perform it. As the book of Zechariah teaches us, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord Almighty. Zechariah 4:6 NIV. It is precisely in these small things that God often manifests his transformative power. By adopting these simple practices, you will begin to notice a gradual change in your inner life. It's like watching the sunrise. At first, there is only a slight brightening on the horizon, almost imperceptible. But gradually the sky brightens, the colors emerge, until finally the sun appears in all its splendor. Spiritual transformation follows a similar rhythm. It begins with small glimmers that gradually dispel the darkness. A particularly important area of this spiritual renewal is our relationship with others. Pope Francis constantly reminds us that we cannot separate our love for God from our love for neighbor. Indeed, one of the most concrete ways to check our spiritual growth is to observe how we treat the people around us, especially those who challenge us or with whom we have difficulties. Have you noticed how in moments of greater connection with God, we also feel greater compassion for others? And how, conversely, when we distance ourselves from spiritual life, we tend to become more irritable, more critical, less patient? It's no coincidence. Our vertical life with God and our horizontal life with our neighbor are intrinsically connected, as Jesus teaches us in the double commandment of love. Therefore, a concrete sign of spiritual renewal will be the gradual transformation of your relationships. You will find yourself more able to forgive, more willing to understand different perspectives, less inclined to judge quickly. You will notice a growing ability to see Christ in the other, especially in those who suffer, in those who are marginalized, in those who are different from you. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Matthew 25:40 NIV. These words of Jesus gain new depth when we understand that our acts of kindness, justice, and compassion are not merely moral obligations, but real encounters with the Christ who lives in our neighbor. Another fundamental aspect of this spiritual renewal is the rediscovery of the value of suffering. In a world that stubbornly seeks to avoid any form of pain or discomfort, the cross of Christ remains a paradoxical sign. It is precisely through suffering accepted with love that we achieve redemption. This does not mean, of course, seeking suffering for its own sake or glorifying unnecessary pain. It means rather recognizing that our daily crosses, when united to the cross of Christ, acquire a redemptive power. As St. Paul says, I now rejoice in my sufferings for you, and I fill up in my flesh what is still lacking in regard to Christ's afflictions, for the sake of his body, which is the Church. Colossians 1:24 NIV. Pope Francis addresses this topic with particular sensitivity. Suffering, when lived in faith, does not diminish our humanity but expands it. It transforms us into more compassionate, more authentic, more aware of our dependence on God. That is why it is often precisely in moments of greatest difficulty that we experience the most significant leaps in our spiritual life. Think of some difficult period you have already faced, an illness, a loss, a crisis. In retrospect, you can probably identify how that experience, however painful, brought growth, maturity, a new perspective on life. This does not happen automatically, of course. It depends on how we respond to suffering, whether we close ourselves in bitterness or open ourselves to God's transformative grace. St. John of the Cross, the great Spanish mystic, spoke of the dark night of the soul, those periods of spiritual dryness, doubt, and desolation that all believers experience at some point. He teaches us that these dark nights, far from being signs of divine abandonment, are often moments of profound purification, where God is working in us in ways we cannot fully comprehend. If you are going through one of these periods now, know that you are not alone. Many saints and mystics have walked this path before you, and they all testify that after the darkest night, there always comes the dawn. As the psalm assures us, weeping may remain for a night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. Psalm 35, NIV. An essential element for navigating these difficult moments is the community of faith. Pope Francis frequently emphasizes that faith is not a solitary journey, but a path we travel together. We need each other for support, for a discernment, for fraternal correction, for shared celebration. Unfortunately, many live their faith in isolation, separated from the community. They attend Mass, perhaps, but without establishing meaningful connections with other believers. They pray individually, but rarely experience the power of communal prayer. They read and reflect on the Word, but without the enrichment that comes from dialogue and sharing with other believers. If you identify with this description, consider taking a step toward greater community integration. Perhaps by participating in a prayer group or Bible study, perhaps by volunteering in some parish ministry, perhaps simply by initiating deeper conversations about faith with friends and family who share your belief. The first Christian communities, as we read in the Acts of the Apostles, were characterized by 4 fundamental elements. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Acts 2:42 NIV. This fourfold model, formation, communion, liturgy, and prayer, continues to be the foundation of a balanced and vibrant Christian life. Examine your own life in light of this model. Have you been seeking continuous formation in faith through readings, studies, reflections? Have you cultivated meaningful relationships with other believers, sharing not only activities but also your spiritual journey? Do you regularly participate in the Eucharist and other sacraments, recognizing them as indispensable sources of grace? Do you dedicate time to personal and communal prayer, building an intimate relationship with God? You will probably identify areas of strength and areas that need more attention. This is normal and expected. We all have aspects of our spiritual life that are more developed than others. The important thing is to seek increasing balance without neglecting any of these essential dimensions. Pope Francis offers us a beautiful image for this integrated Christian life. Faith is like a symphony, where different instruments come together to create harmonious music. We need all the notes, prayer, communion, service, formation, for our spiritual life to be full and beautiful. As you progress on this journey of spiritual renewal, it is also important to rediscover the power of the sacraments, not as external rituals or formal obligations, but as real and transformative encounters with Christ. Confession, in particular, is a frequently neglected but extraordinarily powerful sacrament. Pope Francis speaks of it with special enthusiasm. In confession, we experience God's merciful embrace. It is not a court of condemnation, but a space of healing and liberation. If it has been a while since you have approached this sacrament, consider doing so as part of your spiritual renewal. Many testify how the regular experience of confession brings an inner freedom and a peace that no other practice can provide. The Eucharist, in turn, is truly the heart of Christian life, source and summit, as the Second Vatican Council describes it. Pope Francis reminds us that every time we participate in Mass, we are not merely remembering a past event, but entering into the ever-present mystery of Christ's loving self-giving. Participating in the Eucharist with preparation, attention, and gratitude is perhaps the most transformative act we can perform on our spiritual journey. There is yet another fundamental aspect to our spiritual renewal that we cannot ignore: our relationship with creation. Pope Francis, in his encyclical Laudato Si, invites us to an ecological conversion, recognizing that care for our common home is an integral part of an authentic life of faith. This is not a secondary or optional issue, but central to our spirituality. When we treat creation with reverence and responsibility, we are honoring the Creator and recognizing that we are part of an interconnected web of life. When, on the contrary, we participate in a culture of waste and irresponsible consumption, we are not only harming the planet, but also damaging our own souls. Small daily choices matter in this context. Reducing waste, consuming consciously, appreciating natural beauty, respecting all forms of life. These are acts that may seem insignificant in isolation, but which, when added together, contribute to a culture of care and sustainability. Furthermore, recovering a contemplative relationship with nature can be profoundly enriching for our spiritual life. As the Pope writes in Laudato Si, "The universe unfolds in God, who fills it completely. There is a mystical presence in the leaves that open, in the paths by the sea covered with shells, in the falling rain in the face of the poor." Learning to perceive this divine presence in creation is an inexhaustible source of spiritual renewal. As we approach the end of this reflection, I would like to address one last crucial aspect: the need for patience in our spiritual journey. We live in a culture of instant gratification, where we expect immediate results in all areas. But spiritual growth rarely follows this logic. Pope Francis frequently uses the metaphor of the seed. The kingdom of God grows silently, like a seed in the soil. We don't see the daily growth, but one day we realize that the plant is already formed. Similarly, our spiritual transformation happens gradually, often in almost imperceptible ways. It is only by looking back after some time that we can truly appreciate the path traveled. Therefore, be patient with yourself. Don't expect dramatic transformations overnight. Trust in the process, in faithfulness to small daily practices, in God's grace that works in you silently. As Ecclesiastes teaches us, there is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. Ecclesiastes 3:1 NIV. There will be moments of rapid progress and moments of apparent stagnation. Days of spiritual consolation and days of dryness. Periods of fervent enthusiasm and periods of faithful routine. All of them are part of the journey. All have their value and purpose. The important thing is to stay on the path, one step at a time, trusting in the promise of Him who said, "And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." Matthew 28:20 NIV. You are ready now to take a concrete step on this journey of spiritual renewal. It doesn't have to be something grand or dramatic. It can be as simple as dedicating 5 minutes to silence today, as I suggested earlier, or opening the Bible to a psalm and reading it slowly, letting the words resonate in your heart. Perhaps lighting a candle and offering a prayer for those who suffer, or simply taking a contemplative walk in nature, attentive to the divine presence in creation. Whatever your gesture, do it with intention and presence. Not as another task on your to-do list, but as an act of love, a step toward God who is already walking toward you. And remember, this small act today can be the beginning of a transformative journey that will affect your entire life. We are reaching a turning point, a point of decision. I feel that something is happening within you as you read these words. A seed of renewal is being planted. A desire for closer proximity to God is being awakened. A light of hope is being kindled, perhaps timid at first, but with the potential to grow and illuminate your entire existence. Imagine yourself a year from now, having cultivated this seed of spiritual renewal daily. Imagine the inner peace you will experience, the clarity of purpose, the ability to face challenges with serenity and confidence. Imagine your relationships transformed by the patience and compassion that flow naturally from a vibrant spiritual life. Imagine your ability to perceive God's presence in every moment, in every encounter, in every circumstance, both in joys and in difficulties. This vision is not an unattainable dream. It is a real possibility, within reach of anyone who is willing to walk with faithfulness, one step at a time. As the Apostle Paul assures us, And I am certain that God, who began the good work within you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day of Jesus Christ. Philippians 1:6 NIV. Pope Francis frequently reminds us that holiness is not the prerogative of a few, but the vocation of all. It is not about performing extraordinary feats or experiencing exceptional mystical phenomena. It is about living the ordinary with extraordinary love, doing well what needs to be done, at the time it needs to be done, with the right intention, allowing God's grace to transform our daily actions into opportunities for growth and service. Perhaps you feel inadequate for this journey. Perhaps you think that your past failures, your inconsistencies, your limitations disqualify you for a deep spiritual life. Nothing could be further from the truth. Pope Francis assures us, God doesn't call the qualified, but qualifies the called. And we are all called, without exception. The history of salvation is replete with imperfect people who became extraordinary instruments in God's hands. Moses stuttered. David committed adultery. Peter denied Christ. Paul persecuted the church. Yet each of them, in their human frailty, allowed divine grace to work wonders through them. Their flaws and limitations, far from being obstacles, became the very ground where God's transforming grace manifested its power. As Jesus said to Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12:9 NIV. You are not reading these words by chance. In a universe of infinite possibilities, this message has reached you at this specific moment in your life. Perhaps this is the sign you asked God for in prayer. Perhaps it's the answer to an unease you've been carrying. Perhaps it's simply a gentle reminder that you are not alone on your journey. What matters is how you will respond to this invitation for spiritual renewal. Will it be just another text you read and forget? Or will it be the beginning of a new phase in your journey with God? The choice is yours, of course, but let me offer a final invitation, with all respect for your freedom and discernment. Try taking one small step today, just one, not to fulfill a religious obligation or to appease any guilt, but as a response to the infinite love of a God who first loved us. 1 John 4:19 NIV. That small step may look different for each person. For some, it might be resuming daily prayer. For others, it might be seeking reconciliation with someone who has been hurt. For still others, it might be committing to regular Bible reading or more frequent participation in the sacraments. The important thing is not the magnitude of the step, but the sincerity of the intention and the consistency of the commitment. Even the smallest gesture of openness to God, when made with authentic love, has the power to initiate a profound transformation. As the prophet Isaiah assures us, those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings, like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Isaiah 40:31 NIV. This promise is for you today. A renewal that begins in the Spirit and gradually transfigures your entire existence. Pope Francis gives us a powerful image for this journey. Spiritual life is like climbing a mountain. Sometimes the path is steep and difficult. Sometimes we encounter fog and don't see where we're going. But if we persevere, one step at a time, we eventually emerge above the clouds and behold a magnificent view, and we discover that God has been with us every step of the way. I invite you to begin or renew this ascent today. The view from the summit is worth every effort, every challenge, every moment of perseverance. And you are not climbing alone. The entire community of faith walks with you. The saints who came before intercede for you. And God himself, the Alpha and Omega of our journey, sustains your every step. May the peace of Christ, which surpasses all understanding, guard your heart and mind on this journey of spiritual renewal. May the light of the Holy Spirit illuminate your path, even in the darkest moments, and may the Father's infinite and unconditional love be your constant strength and inspiration. I close this reflection with a prayer that Pope Francis often shares. Lord, take me as I am, with my flaws, with my sins, but make me become what you desire me to be. Some say you always ask for too much, but in truth you offer so much more. You give me the full life, the true joy. You give me yourself. May this prayer become yours as well, as you journey toward a deeper and more authentic spiritual life. And may you say with increasing conviction at the end of each day, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. Galatians 2:20 NIV. Write in the comments, my home is in God's hands.